It's 6:30. It's the witching hour. So I want to welcome you all here this evening, and I'd like to open up with land acknowledgement. So we acknowledge that the David Brower Center sits on the ancestral land of the Chocheyo-speaking Ohlone people. That's important. We pay respect to the Ohlone past and present, and recognize that these lands are extremely important to this important tribe of people. We encourage you all to learn as much as you can about the Indigenous Ohlone people in this area. They have incredible facilities and amenities and events happening all over the Bay Area. So please remain informed and engage with what they're doing. So I'm delighted to welcome you all here today to the AIA East Bay, those that are here in the room with us and those that are online. My name is Ursula Curry. I am the current president of the AIA East Bay. I'd like to acknowledge Megan McAllister and Iona Goodwin, who are the wonderful chairs of the Women in Architecture Committee. They started this committee in the summer of this year, and I know some of you all were part of it, but they got together several times to do some brainstorming sessions, just to understand what do women in our profession, what do they want to talk about, what's important to them. So out of that, something that really rose to the surface was more professional development and networking. So I'm delighted to be here this evening to be able to present the first in our speaker series on universal inclusion. We have an amazing panel of passionate women and experts on this topic. So we're honored that you're all here. The AIA East Bay also has an inclusion policy, and you'll see it on the screen. So we ask that everybody is respectful of everyone's opinion, and we listen and we're conscientious that we all come from different perspectives, but let's be respectful of each other. This evening, we have a wonderful moderator in Helen Schneider. She's the senior project manager at Perkins & Will. She's both my friend and my colleague. She's very well poised to be this moderator for this evening. Helen is the project manager of an incredible project for the Lighthouse for the Blind in San Francisco. She's been working for them for about 4 years, designing an amazing facility, a retreat center up in Napa Valley, where there's over 20 buildings, some completed and some under construction. So I couldn't be more delighted that Helen is going to be moderating the event this evening. So with that, I hand it over to you.
Thank you, Ursula. So I'd like to share the inclusion policy for the AIA East Bay to start. And it is, we are passionately committed to diversity and inclusion, valuing every individual's unique perspective. Discrimination and bias have no place here. We celebrate diversity, fostering an equitable and understanding environment for all. So we are going to start with introductions, and those of us on the panel here are going to introduce ourselves. We will also be joined by Sassy Outwater-Wright, who's going to be a few minutes late. So you'll see her kind of pop in, and she will be the final person to introduce herself. I'm very honored to be here and am by no means the expert. I think I'm really honored to be here with Olivia and Susie and Anne and Sassy when she arrives. My introduction to this topic was working with Lighthouse for the Blind. We started with a master plan for them for their Enchanted Hills camp in Napa. They lost 25 buildings in 2017, and the task was, we have a very hilly site, over 700 feet of elevation drop, and we want it to be fully accessible when we rebuild after the fire. So I'm sharing an image of the tactile model, which is very scrappy, made of cardboard and electrical tape and pipe cleaners, things that denoted both the steep terrain, the existing buildings, those that survived the fire, the proposed new buildings, and then this network of paths throughout the site. And in the image, there are 5 hands on this model because it is 48 inches by 36 inches large. But the project really introduced me to an entirely new, different way of thinking about design and designing for inclusion. Our client group was primarily blind and low vision. And so we were communicating design ideas through tactile means, which was not something I was trained to do. And I want to share a few images from the project just as I share my personal story. And what I am showing now is the pool bathhouse. So this is one of our first buildings to be complete. And what I want to share about this process is that we're the architects, but in a way that is different from all other projects that I've worked on, this has really been a co-created design where the client group brought the beauty. Like we did the drawings, we made it happen, but this building is oriented around an idea of knowable space. So really a trench drain that catches water from the roof is a tactile element in the paving that will let you know if you're on one side or the other of the pool. So it's really a safety and navigational strategy, as well as a water collection strategy. The building is split by a dog trot that allows for people to repose in the shade, but also connect with one another. So there are two sides to the bathhouse. You can wait in the shade for your friends. And one of the design drivers that really came from the client group is when you're blind, you want to run into people. You need to know that others are around. And so designing for spaces for people to gather and connect became a driver, and that central jog trot of the building is really that. And then in these themes of the beauty of the design coming from the client group, I'm sharing an image of casework that has 60 cubbies in it. It's wooden casework, and one of our Lighthouse board members had this idea, well, how are we going to know where we are in the stream of 60 cubbies? And what his idea was, like, we need a way to sort of break up the cubbies. And so we put a stile at 3 different areas that is like a recessed piece of plywood. So you can sort of count where you are in bay 1, bay 2, bay 3. But just to share that this topic for me, I feel like I'm still learning, and I'm very honored to be here with Olivia, Susie, and Anne. And you all are the experts, and I will let you also introduce your personal stories to the topic. Then we'll move into a moderated discussion, and we will close with question and answers from the group. So Olivia, if you can introduce yourself.
Sure. Hi, everyone. First of all, I want to thank AIA East Bay and Women in Architecture Group for inviting me here. My name is Olivia Asuncion. I'm an architect here in Oakland. So I live and work here in Oakland, California. So I guess my personal story starts when I was very young. I was born and raised in the Philippines. I moved to the States when I was 11. And I guess one of the main things that I've learned as I transition from being in the Philippines and the States is that, kind of growing up in a country where we really had to fight for accessibility. My family and my support system there have been amazing in trying to make sure that I was participating and being visible in the public. So they really fought for accessibility for me in school and in all the places that we went to. And then kind of transitioning from that experience to being in the States where the ADA had, passed like just a few years prior to that. And accessibility, though not perfect, was there and it was provided, and it was like, I was automatically accommodated as a person with disability. And I think when I experienced that, it kind of turned on something in my head that's like, the design of space really has a positive impact on, it really can have a positive impact on independence and visibility and inclusion. I think even at a young age, I knew that was something that I wanted to do in the future in my career. So my career just kind of went in the direction of getting into architecture, and then working on the project and construction management of amazing buildings like the one we're in now, the David Bauer Center, and also the Ed Roberts campus. I was very fortunate to be kind of at the tail end of that project and getting to experience that on a property management level. But when I went to grad school in Oregon, that was when I really fell in love with design research. And I really, I was very inspired on what that avenue of architecture can do. And so I worked on a lot of projects that involved learning about the accessibility of evacuation protocols, for instance. That was one of the projects that I worked on. I also did a post-occupancy of the Ed Roberts campus 5 years after it was finished. And my very latest project was a Fulbright research project. So I got the Fulbright in 2020. Unfortunately, it was the worst time to travel around those days. So it got postponed for a couple of years, but in August of 2022, I was able to go back to my roots and go back to the Philippines, see what has changed in the world of accessibility, particularly in education, in the built environment in education, and came back just this past May. And it was undoubtedly the hardest thing I've ever done, kind of going back to a place that was not as accessible and being, really, let's see, what's the word? Where I appreciated my independence a lot here, and then going back to that kind of environment and having that be stripped away a little bit was definitely an eye-opening experience. But I also learned a lot, and I got to connect with a lot of like-minded people. And, that's what I love so much about research and how to connect that to architecture and the built environment. And now I'm back here being really motivated to do, good work, and being making sure that the projects that I work on as an architect moving forward is inclusive and super accessible. And yeah. And what else? Oh, I guess the other latest thing that has happened is that I was recently appointed to the U.S. Access Board, which is a really, really special thing. And I'm very excited. Yeah, that's my story.
Thank you, Olivia. Susie.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Susie Scher, and I am not an architect. I'm actually an occupational therapist. So I come from more of the healthcare field. I've worked mostly in the school setting for the past 15 years. I've also done some work with pediatric clients in clinic setting and private setting. And so that is really what has informed my movement into the accessible consulting world. But to back up a little bit more, when I was a child on the other side of the bay, on the peninsula, I attended an elementary school that was actually incredibly inclusive, especially for its time in the 80s. They had a part of the campus that had supports and services for students with disabilities, a whole variety of mostly mobility-related disabilities. But those students were actually assigned to the general education classroom. So they were my classmates, they were my friends. It was I didn't realize how unique that was until many years later. Ironically, when I graduated from OT school, my first job was back in that same school district, and my elementary school was one of the schools on my caseload. And sadly, it was not inclusive like that anymore. And I've really fought hard to go back in that direction. And sadly, I wasn't there long enough to really make a big difference. But I think that really informed my awareness of lack of access, but also the importance of inclusion when it comes to the social piece, people feeling part of a community, learning from each other, just, you know, that diversity piece at a very young age. We actually had the opportunity to use a wheelchair for 24 hours. We signed a contract that we weren't going to, you know, cheat. And then we wrote a report about our experience afterwards. And then another opportunity was to simulate being blind for 24 hours and similarly write a report. And while that was a very, very tiny slice of time, it made a huge impact on me because I went out into my community, you know, using a wheelchair or being blindfolded. And I'm sure that that lends itself to the journey of what, you know, led me to the field of occupational therapy. Among other things, I've also been a project manager at a nonprofit that builds playgrounds. And at the time, I remember feeling very proud that we built playgrounds that were ADA accessible. Well, it wasn't until later that I learned that it was the very bare minimum. They were using things like wood chips, something called a transfer platform, which then led to stairs, and that actually doesn't increase the access very much for very many users. But I've just always had this interest in sort of how do people access the places that they want to go, the activities and events that they want to participate in. That's really the focus of occupational therapy, is increasing people's access to the activities of their daily lives. We call it ADLs. And so my focus now as an accessibility consultant is really being a collaborator with those who make those decisions and are on the design side of things, the implementation side of things, to bring that awareness of, is this truly functional? You know, let's think about all different types of users, and really just kind of pushing people to be more creative. You know, when you have room to make a different choice that will be more inclusive, why not do it? And let's work together to collaborate and create those spaces. So that's kind of me in a nutshell, but I'm really excited to be here.
Thank you, Susie. I think one of the things I'm so excited about is the diversity of this panel. So we have Olivia, who's an architect, who in our preparation call said the role of people like Susie in her life is really important. Sassy, you've shared that as well. So I'm really excited about just what's represented up here on the panel. Anne, will you share your personal story?
Thank you. Yes, I also want to echo how grateful I am to AIA East Bay for putting this event together. It's always so energizing and educational, and gives me, you know, energy to keep going, to be in a room of people who are passionate about the topic of inclusion. So thank you all for being here. My name is Anne Riggs. I am an architect, a practicing architect. Unfortunately, now with almost 15 years of experience. I was counting, and it's almost 15 now. So my journey into the world of accessibility and inclusive design began early in my career. I spent 5 years designing K-12 schools, public schools in California, which here those facilities are reviewed for accessibility code compliance by the Division of the State Architect, which also is responsible for promulgating the accessibility codes. So when you work on K-12 school projects, you get really, really familiar with California Building Code, specifically Chapter 11B for public facilities. And you go through a really rigorous review process with DSA reviewers and inspectors. So once I had gained those 5 years of knowledge, I actually had the fortune to meet Mr. Kim Blackseth, who unfortunately has passed away. But Kim was CASP, Certified Access Specialist number 21. He was the 21st person to be certified as an access specialist under California's program. And he was the first person who told me about the possibility of becoming a certified access specialist, which in California is someone who has demonstrated expertise in understanding the accessibility regulations. And I pursued it, and I became a CASP, and I continued to utilize my expertise in Chapter 11B when I moved from designing K-12 schools to working on publicly funded affordable housing projects with David Baker Architects, where I currently practice. So in working on housing, I still continue to be, active in helping promote access compliance for projects. So California Chapter 11B, 11A, and then also those projects comply with the Fair Housing Act and the Americans with Disabilities Act. And I represent architects on the Access Code Collaborative, which is a stakeholder group that DSA puts together to review proposed code updates and provide feedback. And we're supposed to speak to our industry and communicate our values and needs. So if you have suggestions, architects, on feedback on code changes or code changes that are needed, let me know. My information is available online. But in addition to those sort of code compliance focus that comes with being a CASP, what I started to notice, especially through my work on affordable housing, was sort of this disconnect between the really strong values that we as architects hold and the really strong values that our clients, specifically these wonderful nonprofit housing developers that we work with, hold, of serving communities that have been the victim of systemic injustice, who are often dealing with poverty due to that systemic oppression, and many of which overlaps with accessibility needs of various kinds. And we have these wonderful values of, how are we going to support these people and communities to thrive? How are we going to restore justice in the work that we do? And these are values that we all share. But then there's this disconnect when we went to talk about accessibility compliance. That, okay, well, how many inches can we shave off of this unit to just barely squeak by with our code? And so this doesn't really fit with our mission and our values. So now I'm really excited that in my work, I am getting to focus more on thinking about how we can incorporate a more inclusive design approach into our work, specifically in housing, which is where I am, but I think it applies to other areas of practice as well. But how do we separate our thought process from sort of narrowly focusing on the minimum that we need to do to comply with code, but instead really incorporate our understanding of community engagement and really talking to people, that is really the fundamental core component of our practice of inclusive design, and that benefits people with different ability needs in addition to benefiting all of the other users that we serve. Yeah, I think that's how I got here.
Thank you, Anne. Now we know where we can go when we have ideas.
Yeah,
dangerous.
I've got their phone number.
Sassy, will you share your personal story and also introduce us to some key terminology?
Yes. So first of all, I'm sorry I walked in late, but it's for a good cause. I got the chance last minute to go to Hot Spring today. And obviously, cancer patients, like, if I'm going to get a chance to go do something, I'm going to jump on it. So sorry, not sorry. It was really nice. I'm Sassy Water-Bright, and I'm here today in my role. I think most aligns is physicist, just specifically acoustic physicist, and that's not an architect. That's not. So it's a weird tie-in, but my journey will kind of explain it. When I was 6 months old, I was diagnosed with a rare childhood eye cancer. And when I was 3 years old, I lost my sight in both eyes to that cancer. And my cancer is caused by a rare genetic mutation, which causes other types of cancer to have a very high likelihood of occurring throughout my life. And that happened. And so I am a person with multiple disabilities. I'm totally blind. I have language and brain injury disabilities from brain tumors, and I have subsequent disabilities related to cancer from a physical standpoint. And all of these occurred for me throughout kind of young adulthood and childhood. And so I came into life as a disabled person, but who had seen before and had a very kind of keen connection to both sides. Even though I was very young when I lost my sight, it stuck with me a lot. And as I was in college, as a blind student trying to study physics, you can guess how much that vexed the professors and the various disability offices, because they didn't know how to make that accessible. And yet I wanted to do physics and acoustics. And acoustics, you need to have a very good mindset for 3D. And so that's how I came into contact with a lot of technology. And I wound up going down the path of working in assistive technology and digital accessibility, and specifically the user experience. of how somebody with multiple disabilities interacts with technology. So a deaf-blind user, a blind person with autism, various disabilities, a lot of aging-related disabilities, when they intersect, what does that intersectionality look like, especially if they have other marginalizing factors? That was what really sucked me into disability advocacy and disability justice work. And more and more and more from my physics background, I got pulled into taking that idea of the digital environment, the technology environment, and putting it into the physical environment, or specifically around healthcare. So in hospitals, in congregate care settings, in nursing homes, assisted living facilities, all these different places where people, if you walk through a healthcare facility's doors for yourself, if something's going on, temporarily or permanently, you're there because you have some sort of something that's happening to your body or your body mind that's causing a disabling situation. Be it a cold, be it a earache, be it a belly ache, a broken arm, or blindness. They're all temporary or permanent disabling factors. All of us, 100% of us at some point in life, whether you stub your toe or you're blind, are going to have a disability for 10 seconds or 100 years, whatever. And how do we make those places more usable? And how in 2023 do we integrate technology so that it is an additive to the built environment, so that the digital environment and the built environment are building a full accessibility model together? And that's, I wind up doing a lot of that in my work now more than ever. And it's fun, but it's also challenging, and it's exciting, and it's vexing when it doesn't work. And so my job is to make it work, to help people understand that disability needs to speak for itself. We need, and by disability right there, I mean the disability community, or the DISCO as we call it. Seriously, that is the hashtag, the DISCO. We need to speak for ourselves, and we need to be part of the design process. And so I want to walk through a couple of quick terms before we get deep into the panel. There have been since the 1950s, really in the 1940s, but it really took off from a political standpoint and a policy standpoint in the 1950s with the no barriers accessibility model, which was to remove barriers for vets who were returning from the war and had disabilities, and people wanted them to be able to access employment and educational opportunities. And so they started looking at barriers that were preventing that. And that grew into the idea of designing in terms of first co-design, which was talk to the veterans to find out what they were challenged to access. And then gradually it evolved and became a lot of the ones that we've heard today: accessible design, inclusive design, universal design, collaborative or cooperative or agreement design. All of these are terms that at some point you've probably heard thrown around. Human-centered design. How are they all different? How are they all the same? Each one of them has slightly different principles, but they generally operate on the same wavelength, if you will. And they rely on the idea that information or the environment is perceptible. You can interact with it, perceive it. Information is communicated. The environment is usable without modification. The environment is safe and available to as wide a number of people as possible of any ability. The environment is intuitive, so it's easy to understand for a variety of disabilities, age-related things, cultural-related things. The environment is as open as possible to self-interpretation, so autonomy directed. You walk in and you can direct how you interact with that environment. The environment has multiple ways to operate it or to use it or to work with it. And all of these things and several others contribute to these ideas. But the one that's really taking off these days is really collaborative design, cooperative or agreement-based design. And that is that all parties at the table, including the users, the communities have a buy-in and an agreement about an environment. And, you know, when you're designing a building, it's really hard to go to whoever is going to live in it or work in it or be hospitalized in it and say, do you agree with this? I'm like, we'll just take a vote on that. But stakeholder groups and talking to people with lived experience directly and getting the general guidelines, as we've heard from Susie and Anne, you know, getting these guidelines together is a start. But I'm not a bare minimum. I'm not a problem to be solved. I'm a human. And so I want to cover a couple of terms that we use. You've heard me call myself a disabled person. You can say person with disabilities or disabled person. Both are okay. One is identity first and one is person first. And it varies depending on which country you're in and who you're talking to. There are sensory disabilities, deaf, blind. There are physical disabilities, wheelchair user, person who uses a wheeled mobility device, or amputee. There are what we call neurodivergent disabilities. This can be autism, sensory processing. Some people choose to lump some communication and nonverbal disabilities into this category, depending on if they have a neural causation. And then there are psychiatric and psychological disabilities, PTSD, schizophrenia, anxiety. Any of those fall into that broad category. And then there's just, I'm sick, I don't know. There's, I am high anxiety today because I have this huge job interview coming up and I'm scared. Yeah, that can be a disability if it's affecting your ability to do something in that moment. So those are some broad definitions, broad terms, but I want to open during questions. Please don't feel like you have to get a terminology right. Our terminologies change day to day. And so it's always just best to ask and get confirmation if you're unsure of something. So that's my quick recap or wrap up of kind of terminology that you might hear us throw around in terms of design and disability. Does anybody have any questions before we kind of throw it into the panel? And if you do this, I'm gonna do that. Okay.
Looks like no,
we're good.
Wow, I did so good.
You did. That was amazing.
You can ask questions at the end. Thank you, Sassy. So Anne talked a little bit about her start in the compliance world, and I'd like to kick off this conversation at the other end of the spectrum, which is let's talk about accessible spaces that inspire us. So what are some examples of places where they really nailed it and got it right? I have some slides from the group and maybe we can start there, but of course, feel free to speak beyond what's represented on the screen, and please provide description of images that are shown.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I think this is a great place to start with where we are in the conversation. What's on the screen are 3 photos. One of them shows the exterior of a multi-story, multi-family residential building. It has a curving, non-rectilinear facade and what we hope is a welcoming entry. And then we're also showing some photos of wide circulation spaces with connections to the exterior and lots of light and plants. And we're showing some interior design with some of the warm and natural materials that are being used on the interior of the building. And if we go to the next slide, I think we have a couple more photos of this project. Now we're seeing the interior of this project, some of the community spaces that were included in the design. We're seeing some residents sitting around tables in rooms that are decorated with Afrocentric art elements. And there's also a photo of an area that has sort of a store-like display of some crafts that were actually created by the residents. And so this building is called the Dr. George Davis Senior Housing Facility. And what's really amazing about this particular residential project is it's located in the Bayview neighborhood of San Francisco. And for this particular project, something that doesn't always happen for architects working on multifamily housing, is that the way the project was set up, and with the help of a really strong local preference program for actually providing homes for individuals who were already residents of that neighborhood, who are just living in different homes, we actually had access to speak to those community members, many of whom actually were able to end up living in the homes, which, as you know, we have a rare opportunity to do that as architects. So what's really wonderful about what came about from being able to really speak and listen to the people who lived in this neighborhood is now we have a community that very successfully translated the existing strengths and positive attributes of the community into the new building. So we've heard stories that people are actually able to still see individuals who they used to see growing up in the neighborhood across the street or in different areas. The community spaces represent the actual desires and things that the residents enjoy. So they're really well used. Actually, I didn't include the picture of the pool table, but there's a pool table that some of the gentlemen really enjoy using. And the area where residents can sell their crafts, I didn't include a picture of him either, but one resident was a really great painter, and he ended up actually teaching painting classes to the other residents in some of the community spaces. And this area for residents to display their crafts just really helps make this a personalized space for the community. It is a senior residence, so it also has some aging in place related features like wider corridors, so that, people use, different shapes and sizes of people using different types of devices can actually pass each other. It uses art as a wayfinding method on different floors, so it's easier for people with, different cognitive situations to help find their way back to their unit, all those things that we like to do. But this is a really great example of a project where those were successfully implemented. I want to also share, though, something I've been learning about recently that I'm really excited about, which is, okay, this was great. We actually had access to the residents for once, but usually we don't get that. That's such a luxury as architects. And I've been really enjoying working with San Francisco-based advocacy and real estate development organization, the Kelsey, who have developed a set of inclusive design guidelines specifically for housing. And one of the actually element number one of their guidelines is something called an inclusive design focus group. And it's a tool that they've developed. It's so simple. It's literally just asking. The hard part is figuring out who to ask, thinking, okay, who can I find who is going to be able to do the best job of representing the potential, identities and needs of the people who are going to be using my facility. So we've done a couple of these so far on projects, and it's just been so amazing. We recently had the opportunity to do a focus group where we were able to speak to the San Mateo County Health Department's high healthcare user care managers. So these are people who are working with individual clients who may not necessarily be living in the building that we're designing, but people in that program may be. And they just provided specific feedback on, what really would be the most supportive for people in that group. And we got all kinds of feedback of things that really there's no way they would ever be represented in the building code. Things about what type of flooring or countertops would be best for people who are maybe going to have increased needs of keeping their unit clean, or for people with psychological conditions where being able to see a lot of dirt in their unit is going to be really distressing. So it's been great to find a tool for how to try and incorporate that feedback, even when you don't know your specific client in person who's going to be using the space.
Thank you, Anna.
Oh yeah, these are my images. So on the screen, two of the photos that I've put on there are of the Palo Alto Fire Station, number 3. What I kind of want to focus on in these slides is, there are some spaces that we have to design as architects that may not be historically inclusive of disabled people. The people who generally use these spaces are, they're not expected, or the expectation is they have the physical abilities to do their jobs. So working for a firm that specializes in fire stations, and an architect who really advocates for accessible and inclusive design. That was kind of an interesting struggle to have. But working on the Palo Alto Fire Station, we kind of created and provided the opportunity to still include all of these accessible elements into it, while not really what do you call it, giving like a negative effect to the people who are going to use it. Like a lot of the struggles that we in the discussions that we have is like, we have all of these tall, big architects, firefighters, tall, big firefighters that are going to be using the space, and you're asking us to have like a 34-inch tall like countertops. Like that doesn't work, right? It's too short for us. So what do we do? So the leftmost photo that we have on there is kind of like the exterior of the building. These have these like little cubes of spaces made of zinc metal panels and terracotta panels with a lot of glazing, depending on the spaces that are living inside. But on the upper right is a photo of the kitchen within the fire station. And the argument is, again, like, we have we are using this kitchen as these firefighters. How can you say that you need accessibility in the space? Because none of us are disabled. None of us are kind of allowed to be disabled. And yet, the code is requiring us to have these accessible elements in these rooms. So how do us as architects like deal with that? So in the example on the upper right, we have these casework kind of at the perimeter of the space that are taller and maybe more accommodating to those bigger firefighters. And that in that middle island where we have these waterfalling Korean countertops, create this lower, more accessible spaces with spaces underneath, like knee and toe clearance underneath, having a sink that is, not, that allow for knee clearance again. So we're still providing these accessible elements in a space that's not typically expected to be. And like kind of branching off of the photos that I'm putting on screen, one of the other discussions that we've had is, this is a 2-story building, and, the clients have made arguments like, why do we need an elevator in this space? There's no one's going to need the elevator. No one who lives in this building needs an elevator. And that was a discussion that it was an argument actually that we had a lot, because, at Thanksgiving, they have families coming over and having dinner there. Like, what happens if you have a disabled member of your family who wants to come and do it? There will be no provisions for them. But one of the kind of more awesome things that have happened during my time designing fire stations was I went to an opening once, and a former chief of that station came to visit, and he was using a wheelchair at that point. And he came in, and, of course, when two people, wheelchair users kind of come together, we do like a little nod and salute to one another. And he said, "Isn't it great that they put an elevator in here? Now I can visit them upstairs whenever I want." And I was like, yeah, isn't it? Yeah. So, like in project types like this, you don't necessarily think about the necessity for these accessible elements. But, when you think of the people who could possibly be using it, like, it's a well worth it venture to put those elements in there, like just the former fire chief as an example is already a great one. So
friend who was a firefighter backwards. You go buddy now.
Yeah, so on the screen is the Ed Roberts campus, images of the Ed Roberts campus. Like I said, I was fortunate enough to have to be in that space as property managers in the kind of the first year of its operation, helping the facilities transition into their space. And kind of the bigger photo on the left is the infamous like red circular ramp. And I think, you know, a lot of people in the East Bay is very familiar with this image. But what I also want to highlight is that there are a lot of other elements in that building that may not be as, you know, as grand and as central as that ramp, but still is within kind of the spirit of inclusivity and accessibility. And the images on the right that I've chosen are not particularly the most glamorous of photos. I mean, it's photos of the elevator button, the big giant elevator buttons at the bottom, so that people in wheelchairs or someone who can't maybe, you know, reach the buttons can kick or, you know, hit it with their foot plate. Or, you know, the very bottom right photo is just, you know, all the doors to the restroom. So there's like multi-occupancy restrooms for men and women, but there are also gender neutral individual restrooms. And fortunately, I don't have a photo of the inside of those gender neutral restrooms, but these are kind of complete individual restrooms, like companion restrooms with Hoyer lifts and different tools and different ways to kind of transfer onto, you know, the different elements in that, like plumbing elements in that room. So, you know, how that building was kind of thought throughout, not just, you know, providing all these like grand gestures, but also really looking at the details and thinking about how can we make these spaces most usable for the most types of people for different abilities. And then last one. I think this is my last one too. Do you want me to?
Yeah.
Okay.
This is your last one.
Great. So this is a photo of a bar in, I think it's owned by Amazon. It's in Seattle. It's by Graham Baba Architects and Studio Pacifica. And Studio Pacifica is led by Karen Breitmeyer, who is another disabled architect who advocates for accessibility and universal design. And what I really like about this project is, you know, this is a space for socializing, right? Like it's not an institutional space, or it's not, you know, like a public surface type of space. It's a bar. And yet we have this, you know, I think when we look at bars and we think of like the accessible portion of the bar, it's like, you know, you have the tall portion and then it drops all of a sudden, right? And then as a disabled person who uses those spaces, it's a pretty isolating experience. And oftentimes that's where like the water station is like put. And so I can't really use it. But in this example, you actually go up to the accessible portion. So you're not below anybody. The bartenders aren't looking down at you. You're at the same level as everyone else. And it feels a lot more inclusive and a lot more accepting and socializing. And I really appreciate that space.
Thank you, Olivia.
Okay, I'm up. So I recently traveled through San Francisco Airport, or SFO, specifically the Harvey Milk Terminal, which being a Bay Area native, it took years to get to this point. But as I was traveling through, I wanted to note some of the elements that really stood out to me. So I have some images on the screen, specifically the one in the middle bottom, that as an occupational therapist, I'm highly aware of the sensory input that we all either are seeking or trying to avoid. And so being able to walk up close, particularly if you have low vision or visual challenges, and see more detailed information about the flight times and gate numbers and things like that, not having to crane your neck and look at something high up that's hanging perhaps, close to the ceiling. And you can't, it's hard to see on this picture, but I do have a close-up, I think on the next slide, that at the bottom right of this screen with the information about the gates and the map of the terminal, it says, this is a quiet terminal. And what that means for those of you who haven't been there yet is that they don't do announcements that boom throughout the whole terminal, which I'm very auditorily sensitive, so I love this terminal. They just do the announcements in the gate for those arriving or departing flights. The information is very specific to that gate. As you're walking through the larger elements to get to the gates, it's very wide and open and quiet. On the top left, I have an image of a variety of different seating options. There's sort of a bench along a wall with a nice calming lighting feature. Then there's a low sort of island space, but it's meant for sitting or perhaps climbing on for those who want to get the wiggles out, with a chair there that's rotating and could, I think, easily be moved. So it would provide access to all sorts of folks. The top right is another image with a variety of different seating options and then a play area. As a parent of young children, I would love to bring my kids here and let them get the wiggles out before or after a flight, and then having the different seating areas available. The next slide here, I have some images with my trip to the restroom. So the left image is actually my bags in the stall that I used. I really like the fact that there were hanger coat hooks, both lower and higher up, because sometimes it's just too high up, or it's so low that your coat is dragging. And so I just thought that was great to have that option. The middle picture shows a gender neutral bathroom with, I think, fairly clear signage, nice contrast with a dark background with the circle and then a white triangle just to let you know that it's gender neutral. There was Braille on all of the signage. And then the photo on the right shows a companion care bathroom for folks who need to go in and take care of their bathroom needs with support from someone else. And whatever that reason is, if it's somebody with a disability, if it's a caregiver of a child, who knows? Let's keep the door wide open to who might need to use that or benefit from using it. I did go in and check it out because I couldn't help myself. And it actually had a bench with a curtain. So perhaps, one person's using the toilet and the other person wants to give them some privacy, and then vice versa. The elements obviously were very accessible to use. So I was just really impressed with the thought that seemed to have gone into these elements. And then especially with the seating, there were places that you could go and just have a quiet moment. Even though it was a quiet terminal, I mean, sometimes we all just need a little break from the chaos of traveling. Or perhaps you're traveling with someone who's having a particularly hard time. And so being able to seek out those spaces would be really valuable. And then there were great spaces where it looked like it was meant to engender, communicating and socializing and chit-chatting. And, maybe you're traveling with a group or your family or something like that. So I really appreciated the diversity and variety of those elements.
Thank you, Susie. I'm hearing some themes among the three of you. And Sassy, I'm wondering if you can describe a space that has been inspiring for you.
And I'll add on one more airport feature. Usually I have a guide dog laying at my feet, and then you have a service dog, their team, well, so that, if you walk off an 8-hour flight, you can let your dog go take care of that as soon as possible. So how many of you have walked into like a lobby of a healthcare facility, especially a hospital? And it's one of those big circular kind of spaces with halls shooting off at 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, 8:45, 10:52, if you're looking at a clock face. There's hallways going every which way, and it's big and it's echoey. Have any of you, and they call it like an atrium design, have any of you ever been in a space like that trying to find your way?
Yes.
Okay. So now you go up to the front desk, you're blind, you're working your guide dog, you ask them to send you to radiology, and they go, yeah, it's that way. And I'm like, okay, which way was that way? Is that to my right or to my left? Like back there, over there. Over there is a kingdom I will never get to go to. Sorry. And so as the Harewood evidence, I'm an active cancer patient in chemo. And for the past 4 years, I've been doing that. And I've had to go a lot to Mission Bay UCSF campus, adult cancer precision cancer center over on 4th Street. I don't know how many of you have had to be there. I am sorry if you have, but it is an amazingly designed space if you are blind and you don't want to have to deal with having to ask for assistance every time you go in there, and sometimes you have to go 5 days a week. Very intuitively, without having to be shown, I was able to start very quickly picking up where I was going and how I was getting there, and I could do it independently from the jump. Because the room that you walk into when you enter that building is laid out beautifully and artistically and very welcoming, but also linear. So when you step in, straight ahead of you and to your left are staff members to assist with things that you can ask questions of, and you can hear the flow of people talking to them. So you know, okay, the reception is over there. I hear patients asking questions. To your right, you can instantly hear and smell that there's a cafe. So you know, okay, when I'm just freaking out because this doctor just gave me this bad news, I can go over there and get a tea. And very conveniently located and easy to locate for a blind person along your path of travel are quiet little spaces to sit, easy to find trash cans. That's a special one. And curving hallways. So it's a big, long corridor. It's not 10 different corridors going in 10 different diagonal directions. You can go left, you can go right. The corridor will feed you and snake you through the various things in the hospital, but you're all going the same direction, and the stream splits very rarely, and you can easily tell where to go because it's not diagonal, it's not huge and echoing. It's a beautifully laid out space in that it's everything that's close by me I can hear, and I can identify, and I can target. I can have my guide dog target things. So it's very easy for him to see from the front that he has to curve left and then target the elevators. And he instantly knows when we walk in, if she's pointing me to the left, that's probably where she wants me to go, or she wants me to go to radiation oncology, which is just to the left of the elevators. So I'm going to look at her and ask her which one she wants, and she's going to gesture gently left, right, and I'm going to go there. And so it's very easy for a guide dog to find their way with their person through these buildings. And the way that they did this took so much weight off my shoulders. As a cancer patient, I have a lot of self-advocacy to do to access things that I need. Even in a great healthcare system, you still got to be kind of on that lookout. Am I accessing all the print information? Am I knowing everything that's happening right now? Do I know who's in the room? Do I know what's in the room? Do I know what's about to happen? Take a breath. It's a lot when you can't see what's going on around you. And so for once, if I don't have to worry about navigating and finding someone who's going to lead me safely, and I know where I'm going, and I can take my time getting there, I can grab a coffee if I want to, I can sit down and rest for a second if I need to and take a phone call. I know where there are a zillion little alcoves with quiet space if my brain can't language and I'm dealing with aphasia, which means I can't speak. There's a quiet space where I can sit down and type out what I need to say next. The fact that they made these things easy to locate, very intuitive, and very centralized so that you know where you're going and you can easily know how to get there, and everything is Braille and large print labeled. And again, there are gender neutral bathrooms, there are large bathrooms. You can bring any number of mobility devices, including a guide dog, in with you, and find, things like that. And in a medical facility, that's pretty rare, believe it or not. And the last piece I will add is a tough one for architects, but the culture there. The culture there of people letting me be disabled and valuing that, not devaluing it. Because they see us taking care of ourselves, and in a building where we can easily do that. That culture comes from the environment, comes from it all feeds on each other. Believe it or not, it's this giant teetering layer cake, and you pull one layer out, it's like a Jenga tower. It crashes. And so to have an environment where physically, mentally, spiritually, I feel like I can be there and be safe while fighting for my life is a huge, huge win in my book. So hopefully I described in words without pictures, because that's what I get every day.
I think hearing your personal experience in space, and Olivia, for you to share too, what life is like navigating when things go well, is really great for us as architects to hear. What I'm wondering is, how does our design process start to create more spaces where you feel like, oh, I feel welcome, I feel like considered and loved in this space?
If I can start that conversation real quick, I think we were having this discussion a little bit when we were doing our pre-presentation meeting, but again, like Sassy was saying, we have all these terms that we're dealing with, like universal design, inclusive design, and all that stuff. And we are kind of marketing that to architects as, if you create accessible places, then it can benefit disabled people and this person and these types of people, and which is great and it's accurate. That's what universal design should be, in terms of being able to accommodate all types of people. But I think one of the things that we need to unlearn and relearn as designers is it's okay to design for just disabled people too, I think like when we're designing and we're looking at the requirements, like when we think that, oh, this is specifically for a disabled person, that's when we bring out the code book and kind of huff and puff through, as we leaf through this code book. And it's almost like an annoyance, like a burden for us architects to take, and to be able to unlearn that and consider it. Yeah, I think like universal design and all those different terms that we talked about exists just so we can start like thinking about disabled people and like accommodating for them, right? So just having that little shift in our brains, and saying, I am specifically doing this to help this person who's having to experience this barrier in physical space, and I'm doing it for that. And it just so happens that as a result, it's helping everyone else, because like providing accessibility helps a whole bunch of people, but not providing accessibility hurts people. So to kind of center disability in that conversation and those initial processes is, I think, the direction that we should start going, right? Like, and as architects, as people who literally shape spaces,
Starting with the human.
Yes.
Not the code book.
I think that's the biggest thing is I am not the code book. what I prefer or what I want isn't going to be found necessarily. Those are guidelines, but the word guideline is not a hard and fast. What works for me and my blindness might not work for the next person who's blind. We're all humans too. I'm a blind human, but I'm still a human. And so we're going to have our differences, and we're going to have our own personal preferences and needs and style ideas and wants. And, you know, for me, I saw a space that was really designed for blind cane users primarily. And I kind of teasingly looked at the person who had been really instrumental in the design process for this space in Maryland. And I said, okay, where does the guide dog go? Because there's a place to hang your cane. Where do I put my dog? This is not a space, but I think you'll get the idea. My little sibling came back from Italy a couple years ago and goes, I need to come over. I brought you something. I'm like, okay. So they come over to my house and come in and they hand me a box, and I open the box and feel the thing, and I start realizing, oh my gosh, wait, there's Braille on this. And I start reading, and it's Italian, and thank goodness I was a physics and a music major because I can read Italian and sing it, not speak it. But I recognized Italian Braille. And I went, what did you do? Where did you find this? Did you go to like some blind center? And they're like, no, it was a chocolate bar in the grocery store. And it had chocolate, it had Braille on it. I'm like, are you serious? Like you were just walking through the random any grocery store and you found a chocolate bar with Braille on it? And they're like, yeah, a lot of stuff's labeled in Braille there. I'm like, why don't I live in Italy like now? Yeah. I was tutoring a little kid at the time, and her favorite thing to do was crawl into this little cupboard, and she'd be like, I'm going to close the door and I'm going to Italy where they speak Italy. And when she did that the next time, I was like, no, they speak Braille. And that made me feel included, to know that there are products that have Braille labels on them, to know that those little tiny details are something someone somewhere went, ooh, that would be so cool if I did that. Mm-hmm. I'm like, I'm not a, oh, so cool special. I want to be just, that's every day. Mm-hmm. Braille and everything. How could it not go out without Braille? Like, that's the question. Mm-hmm. How could it not go out without sign language interpretation? Yeah. How could it not go out without accessible ramps and stairs? And stairs are like a thing of the past. Like, how could it not? Because we're so cool. I mean, just that's, I can chop onions in the dark. You can. I accommodate you sighted people all the time with lights. That's an accommodation. So where's my Braille chop?
Amen. I'd love to tag onto that, because that really perfectly sets up something I wanted to share, which is, so I am what artist and disability activist Emily Barker, I love this term that they've taught me, calls a temporarily abled person. So, you know, what, based on my lived experience that so far, you know, includes experiencing a life where I physically fit within the range that, you know, centuries of human design practices have come to center in the spaces that we've created. You know, how can I bring that experience and use that to help maybe other architects be able to see the able bias that is in our work in a way that's constructive and sort of just helps flip that switch in our brain, just like, oh, right. So I like to point out that, you know, every space, every environment that humans design is designed to accommodate human limitations and abilities. You know, we've set up this world, you know, we enclose our space because we don't have a lot of fur and we get cold. we design stairs that have, you know, 7-inch, we have this incredibly narrow, you know, definition of stairs, you know, 7 inches to, you know, 8-inch risers, because this range of us that we've decided to accommodate with them, we can't step up a 3-foot step. We quote unquote all know that. So we would never design stairs that were 4 feet high each step. So there is a built-in range of accommodation that we are constantly designing to and using to shape our environment. So I think a fundamental part of this is noticing that, okay, when I'm designing as a designer, I always have a bias, which is based on my own physical abilities and the physical abilities that I've seen and known in my community and my experience. So I think having that understanding really helps you realize like, oh, right, if I want to design a successful space, if I know that my experience, obviously none of our experience is going to include all of the different ranges of ability, even if we are blind, as Sassy just pointed out, we don't know everyone's needs. So I think when we understand that, it shows, not tells, why we want to embark on an inclusive design process and have conversations and reach out to people and bring them into the process, so that we're able to get a broader perspective and increase that range of ability that we're designing for.
Thank you. And I want to do a time check because I gave Ursula my timepiece. Oh, I know. 7:41. Okay. We have until it. Okay. Maybe before I ask my next question, I'll reach out to the group. Question. I actually had one that ties to really well. Right now, this goes back to the terminology because that's a great point about that anyone who be experiencing disability at various times of spectrum. Has anyone started to use more of the terminology around experiencing disability and trying to open that up and have more conversations? I know that you talked about working with very able-bodied people and take somebody's personal experience with experiencing disability for them to appreciate it. Have you been able to have this simple conversation reminding people that they're currently not experiencing disability?
Yeah, I mean, in a lot of the talks that I've done before, that's like a line that I always say, right? Like disability is the one marginalized group that's not it's not very picky. It's something that doesn't discriminate against age, sex, gender, religion, anything. So at any point in life, one can experience disability. And I mean, I think if like we remember that, then we kind of gain this empathy and start designing places, like considering other people, because as Anne was saying, we all have our lived experiences and we know what we know and we design based on what we know. But when we start looking at other people and really start considering and thinking and talking to them about what their needs are, then the design becomes richer, I think. And I keep saying inclusive, but that's what it is, right? That's the whole point of this discussion, is to make sure that I don't know.
In the activism space, there's what we call disability justice, which I kind of generally refer to disability as depending on what part of the country you're from, the highway or the freeway. It cuts across, as you said, all the other streets. Every community is equally available to be experiencing disability. And when you have additional marginalizing factors, and then you add disability on top of that, it can take the term intersectionality to a whole new level. So disability justice was started right here in Berkeley and Oakland in 2005 to really address the fact that there are dominant culture people with disabilities, and then there are people with disabilities who are in underserved communities or marginalized communities, LGBTQ, BIPOC, any of these other communities that, when a disability access issue comes up, you're going to have a whole additional set of things to solve for and to point out and to demonstrate. And so there are a lot of conversations going on right now around trying to help people understand that disability and accessibility and design needs to be kind of at the table all the time and can't be something that just gets a checkbox pass fail. It needs to be in the room anytime, anywhere. But as Rebecca Coakley says, we are the crumbs of the crumbs. Too often we get the last of the last. So we need to flip that.
Yep.
And there are a lot of people working to do that.
So I just kind of like branch off of that discussion a little bit and start talking about, you know, we're all architects in this room, or most of us are architects in this room, and we all went to architecture school. And I'm wondering in the group, like, when did you start thinking about accessibility in your architectural education? And for me, I had to kind of do that on my own. You know, there aren't really any particular classes that that focus on that. And I think if we're going to try to change like architecture and how architects think about all the stuff, that we start in education. And yeah, I mean, we're talking about like intersectionality, right? Like, I am an immigrant woman, like brown skin, looks young, but not quite. And I also have a disability. And, you know, being an architect, which historically has been like a male dominated field, a strong male but dominated field. And I don't exactly quite fit that description. So kind of going through like the process of going through architecture school and you know, going to start working as an architect and going to like all these construction places where the others are the same. They're big, strong men. It kind of opens up this, like, I start thinking about like, what if, you know, this was more of a norm for having like people of different who are part of different types of communities being in architecture and having that voice at the table, and, you know, being able to start designing things from the get-go with that type of thought process and like in mind is like going to be really crucial for the future of inclusive design.
We have another question.
Since you mentioned the construction site, I just want to talk to you about your experience, because construction and construction research is such a large role in being an architect. With that, construction are so often do they are there any
Yeah, it's wild. Well, I mean, personally, that's a conversation that starts from the very beginning of construction administration. Be like, hey, like, I need accommodations if you want me to participate in construction admin, right? And that's a conversation with the firm that I work in. It's a conversation with the construction company that I work in. And on a realistic level, I'm not going to be able to go everywhere, right? And so that's when we start exploring the different technologies that exist and making sure that our budget allows for another person to be on the team so that they can be, you know, the camera person, or they can be the ones who are actually walking the site. And yeah, I mean, part of that conversation is being open to those types of unconventional ways of doing construction administration, because yeah, it's hard. And I've run into a lot of like struggles in that part of my profession. So yeah, it's being open to that communication and being accommodating is going to be really important.
I'm an architect. I'm a little bit shy of 5 feet. And when I'm shopping for food, I often struggle to be able to reach things on the shelf. It's a nice way to meet people in the store.
Right. I've made a lot of friends that way. Yeah.
Activities that we take for granted.
I think one thing disabled people are really good at is adapting, right?
Yes.
Because the world is not built for our abilities. We tend to have to figure things out on our own, right? Mm-hmm. When I was living in the Philippines, like that was all the time. When I lived here, it was like a lot of the times I would have to go through that kind of thought process. I mean, yeah, either I like because my chair raises up, either I raise it up all the way up and like stand up on the chair. It's a very, very dangerous thing, but that's what I would have to do. Like if no one is around me, it's either that or I don't get the mac and cheese that I want at the top shelf, you know, like those are my two options, basically. Yeah.
Ask for help or use the camera on my phone to pick up every box, every can. Mm-hmm. Literally in college, this is no joke, I was in the store. This was before the iPhone and text-to-speech technology. So I had to ask, and I was asking somebody where a can of soup or something was. And she goes, well, doesn't your dog like read that for you? Yeah, he speaks with a French accent. Yeah, no, we have to get really creative. So like my creative solution now is order, like Instacart or something, because then I don't have to go into the store and either A, ask, or B, pick up everything and take a picture with my phone and have it read aloud what it can see. And that can be great in certain situations, but shopping, not so much. So yeah, you're right. We have to get really creative with how we do stuff.
If I can just piggyback off of what you were saying, Sassy, the perspective that I'm always thinking through with, collaborating and consulting with folks is the ease. What is going to be the most efficient way for people to move through this space? What's going to be easy? What's going to be making them want to come back? If you're talking about retail or hospitality or, the hotel industry, events, things like that. You want people to like write the good Yelp review or tell their friends and want to come back. And so talking with the clients about, let's think in terms of like multiplier factors here. What's going to bring the most people in? What's going to give them the best experience, which is, side note, going to increase your client base and their loyalty and, your bottom line and all of that. But, I think what's been mentioned before is kind of, let's flip this on its head and not think about, oh, we've got to just do the bare minimum with the code, but let's throw that out and think about what's going to bring the most ease. We all appreciate when we can like run on into our favorite coffee shop, quickly order our favorite drink, maybe say hi and be known by the barista if you're that type of person like me, and then, scoot on out really easily and not have to fight with the door that's really heavy or not knowing where the line starts or, having a hard time reaching for something. Mm-hmm. So just kind of stepping back and looking at it from that perspective. I find clients that I work with have been able to sort of get on board with that more easily.
I think we don't realize that it's not just big stuff. Mm-hmm. It's like little things that,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Olivia, you asked the question, when were you exposed to accessibility as an architect for the first time, so that you had to kind of go digging for yourself? I would imagine for many of us in this room, it's your first job and you're told to like assessment the code and all that to the project, which is not where we want to be going. So what comes next with designing for inclusion? Like, how do we move beyond minimum compliance?
I have something to say. I can start answering that. It's actually, I wanted to say this as a piggyback to what Susie just said, because she started talking about something that I think is really a powerful concept for architects to embrace is, how do we communicate the value of taking an inclusive design approach? We're architects, we're always working with clients. How do we communicate the value of that in a way that is going to be embraced by our clients? Because, that this is, how do we get this actually implemented in the built environment? And so I have a few practical tips for that. And one of them is, don't tell your client that you're doing it. Nope. Just do it. Because our clients have never come to us and said, I noticed that you made this unit 23'8", but I think you really could have gotten it down to 23'6" if you just really, shaved that extra inch out of the bathroom. They're not looking at that. And I say this a little bit tongue in cheek, but in reality, as architects, our job is to have the expertise and the spatial awareness and the understanding of, this is how you design an environment for humans. This is how you make a good place. And so part of our approach needs to be thinking about that from an inclusive design standpoint. And just, we have in our brains and from our intuition and our experience, we have a set of standards that we use, and just making sure that what we hold as our personal minimum as a designer is reflective of our understanding of, the needs of the users that we're serving. I can probably stop there for now.
Well, for the future of inclusive design, what I'm hoping for is that it kind of follows the same trajectory that we are experiencing with sustainable design right now. Like, that would be really awesome. If, we kind of start looking at inclusivity as, I don't know, like a bigger social problem, which it is, right? But like, I don't know, someone
yeah, I feel like this is a cute pitch, the Kelsey design standards. Yes. They're only for housing, but the Kelsey attempted to put together a LEED style framework for inclusive design for housing. What's unique about it is, with energy, fire protection, you can make a checklist of like, these are rigorous standards and metrics and values that you want to hit. And I think the challenge with inclusive design is it's more about the process. So check out the Kelsey, check out their housing design standards. It's an attempt.
I think it also relates to sustainability, because if we're designing spaces that are inclusive, they're not going to be a space that's subject to a lawsuit because they weren't accessible. And then they have to go back and retrofit a condition. Like, it will be a space that endures. And I think that is sort of the ultimate measurement.
That was another point I meant to make about communicating value, which is that when you embrace inclusive design, hopefully you avoid some of these headaches that people run into because they tried to get away with minimum compliance. If you've taken an approach from the beginning that you want a space to be inclusive and accessible, and you're not, trying to get a razor thin 1 to 12 slope, maybe you won't run into a problem in your inspection because you went with a 5, a much lower slope in the first place. And maybe you won't get as many reasonable accommodation requests from your residents after your building opens, which this is, again, housing specific, but.
No question, but I won't add to that. It's like, if we're just doing minimal compliance, it's all not sustainable because it'll evolve over time. So these amounts, as we progress and get more understanding of them, we will start to expand them. So if you're just doing minimal now, you're not going to be needing to future.
I had kind of that perfect experience today. Was at this hot spring, and I'm, like you want to do at a hot spring, floating on my back, just kind of daydreaming a little bit. And this opportunity, I had a couple friends going up there yesterday. Like, they were planning on going up there spur of the moment, and we were talking, and I had a chance to jump on and go with them. But it was also I had to conform to their schedule and their timing and hitch a ride with them. And I was just kind of like, I am daydreaming because we were floating in the ADA compliant pool for the hot spring. And I'm like, this is great. But one of these days, I want to be able, as a disabled person, maybe not in my lifetime, but hopefully soon, that I could just, grab my keys, run out the door, jump in my autonomous vehicle, jet up to a hot spring, and jet back anytime I want to. And so, architecture designed that one space, but how does it connect to everything else? And I think that's the broader question for me, is how do we build not just inclusive design, helter-skelter here, there, and everywhere. How do you unite all of this so that society and community feels more inclusive to anybody? And there are people who are working toward this idea that we won't have disabilities in 60 years. I'm like, oh, honey, you need us. You need us so much you don't even know. So yes, there will be disability. And we better start acting like it and valuing it and not just treating it like it's the dregs and the retrofits. It's the creme de la creme of how we design, because what's good for us winds up usually being pretty good for everybody else. And so how do we take all these inclusively designed spaces and unite them so that I can, or any disabled person can access any ADA plus space? That's what moving beyond like bare minimum compliance means to me. Because then I become not a checklist, but anyway.
That's a really good spot to end on. It's right at 8 o'clock, and Sassy, you ended with like human.
Blame the hot spring vibe I got going right now.
Thank you all for joining, and thank you to this amazing group of women up here.
Thank you for having us.